Okay, so I'll make sure I have the participants window open, so if anybody turns up, I can let them in. All right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about assessment. Now, in my book, I call one of the challenges that I think we all face as teachers, and we may or may not call it this or realize this, but this idea of transactional teaching. The idea of you're exchanging work for teaching or something like that. So, or you're exchanging work for a grade. Okay. I've always fought against this with my students. It's a real frustration. And I know, from the very beginning, I have said, look, if you worry about, if you do the work and you learn stuff and you provide, creative answers and so on and so forth, the grade will follow. But that's not always true, in terms of their thinking about it, because they focus on the grade, right? And we shouldn't, this shouldn't come as no great surprise to them, to us. And a lot of this is tied to how we assess things. There was a rash of stories toward the end of last year, beginning of this year, about cheating, and not only cheating itself in terms of people doing it, but also people, also students reacting to attempts to stop cheating. These are some quotes from some of these stories. And, we have to ask ourselves a really hard question about, who really suffers from cheating? And what is the suffering that's going on there from cheating? Is it the student? I mean, we always like to say that students are cheating themselves. But that only makes sense if the assessment is actually authentic, and that they're actually, cheating themselves out of learning something. If the assessment is not tied to them, they're cheating the system, and it becomes much more of a game. And this is a problem. This is a systemic problem in terms of the way we have education set up these days. I call it the industrial model of education, and something that we need to be, having some serious discussions about long term. There are things that as teachers we can fix, and there are things that as teachers that we cannot fix. At the end of the semester, I still have to give all of my students grades, as do you. But the question is, how do you get to those grades? There are quite a few strategies around this. There's actually a movement called ungrading and student contracts and grading contracts and things like that are used at some that some faculty or have been advocating. People like Jesse Stommel and others are really big into that. And that's one way to approach it. There's some aspects to our students that I find that to be a little challenging with. If you get too weird on them, they have trouble following along in terms of the logic of what they're doing. And so, we may get to that point, but I don't think we're necessarily there yet. You got to remember, the other thing about our students is they're really not good at learning. They have a vision of learning that's given to them by a system that doesn't necessarily make sense, doesn't necessarily explain the logic of that vision. As a result, and also many of them are what we, were referred to as academically challenged. A lot of times I've discovered the problem with those students is not that they're stupid, but they're not good at school. And so, grades are can be a part of divorcing students from school. Because if they don't see it as they see it as a random game, and one that can be cheated by a lot of people. And then they say, well, what's the point? What does this mean to me? And we get into these situations where we're really just trading grades for work. And that's, if you really want excellent work, that can be a real problem. So one of my favorite examples to cite about motivation in students is a psychology problem that goes back to the 1940s. This is, geez, it's going to be 75 years old or more at this point. It's called the Dunker candle problem. And so this is used as a measure of creative thinking. If you want to take a moment, I will solve the problem in a moment for you. But you know, the problem is basically you've got these ingredients. You've got a candle, you've got a box of tacks, and you've got a book of matches. And how can you stick the candle to the wall without in such a way that the wax won't drip on the table? And no, you can't move the table. Anybody have an idea? Welcome, Carmen, by the way, and Linda. Didn't get to say hi to you guys. Anybody have an idea on how to do that? Have I made you do this before, June?
No, you haven't.
Okay.
Now the candle wax cannot drip on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Don't light the candle.
You have to affix the candle to the wall, light the candle, and make it so that the candle wax doesn't drip on the table.
Oh, so it's at a perpendicular.
Yeah.
Mm.
And you have those three elements that you can use. You have a book of matches, you have a candle, and you have a box of tacks.
Mm. Whoa. I would need a lot more time.
It's actually, it requires a little bit of lateral thinking. The fundamental problem that people run into with this is that they look at the objects as they are, and they don't look at the objects as what they could be. And so it's used to measure creative thinking and unusual problem solving, you know, for unexpected problems. So the solution is you dump the tacks out, use the tacks to affix the box, and put the candle in the box. And I assume it's a pretty sturdy box, but in any case, the problem most people don't have struggle with is that that they view the box as a container for the tacks instead of as part of the solution to the problem. Now, the interesting thing about this problem is that they've been using this for years to do psychological studies and to say, okay, how long does it take someone to figure out how to do this? Now, obviously, there are a lot of variables involved here. But one of the interesting things is they've actually tried to use this to test extrinsic motivators. So in the early 1960s, this is not a new thing. This is from 60 years ago now almost. In the early 1960s, they did a number of studies in poorer countries like India, where their research dollars could go a lot further. But they had large groups of people do this test, and they took one control group and they said, do the test, right? And then they took another group, and they said, we will give you $20 to be the first to finish the test, which at that point was a fair amount of money in India. And here's the crazy thing. The people who you bribed to take the test to solve the problem took longer to solve the problem than the people who you didn't bribe. And this is a pretty robust psychological result. It's been replicated many times over the years. And what's the reason for that? Well, the reason is simple. If you give somebody an incentive to do something, they're going to focus on the incentive before they focus on the problem. And that's a distraction. You know, they're worrying in the back of their mind, how am I going to finish faster than everybody else so that I can win the prize? And whereas the other folks are not even thinking about that, they're just thinking about the problem. So what the lesson to this is, if you want somebody to dig a ditch and you want them to dig it faster, and you give them a bonus for digging 1.5 miles instead of a mile-long ditch, that actually works. You can actually get faster results from that. But if you want somebody to think creatively about problem solving, something that's complicated, the kind of things we're trying to teach our students, you don't want them to think about that extrinsic motivator. You want them to, that learning has to come from within. It has to be meaningful to them at a certain level. The problem we have in our system is we've built a system that's based around extrinsic motivators, and those are called grades. I mean, how many times have your students come to you and said, how do I get an A in this class? Or how do I pass this class? That's actually the depressing one. I don't care if I get an A, I just need a C, right? Versus how many times have your students come to you and said, what can I learn in this class? You know, what am I gonna be able to do after this class as opposed to before this class? And so that's, you know, that means that they're not going to be creative. They're going to follow your instructions, and they're not going to think, come up with creative solutions and learn how to think for themselves as easily. It can happen, but it's, you know, it's a distraction from that. So you have to think really hard about what grades are doing to the motivational priorities of your students. And assessment, of course, is central to all grading. And how you get to those grades really matters. So I have 3 different kinds of assessments that I use in my class. Now, I don't necessarily explain this per se in this way to a student, but I'll explain it to you guys. I have what I call gateway assessments. And what those are basically is they unlock a portion of the class. There are formative assessments, which is the vast majority of the assessments in my class fall under that category. And then I have summative assessments. And they all work together. They're integrated into the way the class works. Another very important part of the system is that I use a point system. And I do this for very specific reasons. And those reasons are that, you know, I feel like if you tell somebody, you got a D on this assignment, you scored 40 points less than you should have scored, right? Or you could have scored. That's telling them they're in deficit. Knowledge is constructed, it's not taken away. And so getting them to think in terms of building stuff as opposed to I'm operating at a deficit, I can't do this, I always get D's or I always get C's. Getting them to think of, okay, well, I can actually do 3/4 of this now. Maybe if I push a little bit, I can do 4/5. Maybe I can do, you know, get up to a B or a 90 or whatever, right? Or 1/10 or 9/10. You know, I do that very deliberately, the point system, for that reason. It's psychological, right? You do have to sell this. The students are not used to this kind of thinking when it comes to their learning. And it's something that I have to reiterate all the time. And I take several points along the semester to say, you know, the way to think about this is not how many points you know, what percentage of points you've gotten so far. The way to think about this is how many points are left and what can you get to with those points, right?
Tom?
So yeah, go ahead.
Are we supposed to be moving through slides? Because I still have the top slide on my screen.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. What the heck? Oh, that's why. Okay. No wonder you guys are going, no, you need to, okay. Let's see. Resume share. What the heck? Sharing is paused. Bring your shared window to the front. Okay, let's try this again. No wonder you guys couldn't figure out the Dunker. You didn't even see the Dunker candle problem.
No. I was like,
all right.
Thumbs on, then
okay.
I need to touch them.
Okay, my bad. It's Zoom not interacting. Okay. So let me flip through the slides here real quick.
Okay.
So yeah, so these are some of the quotes on cheating, right?
Okay.
And this is, you know, talking about how grades can demotivate students and lead to And so this is the Dunker candle problem. So, okay, see, so this is what you're confronted with, and that's the solution. Okay. And again, this is just meant to illustrate motivation. So these are the different kinds of assessments. And I'm going to go back through these so I don't have to dwell on this too much. Again, it's important to show your students as much as possible. So I've actually spent a considerable amount of time trying to design various graphics to show the students, first of all, how all the different pieces of the class hold together. You know, the problem with that, of course, is the more you try to explain something, the more complicated the diagram gets. And so that's always a battle when I'm trying to do my visualizations. I've actually gone this semester to using, and I use them both, but I'm using this visualization as a way of showing my students how everything holds together and builds toward the summative assignment at the end of the semester. So these are all largely part of that formative process, all of the rocks supporting the bridge, okay? The final portfolio is that summative assignment that's at the end of the semester. Yeah.
Do you ever have students or colleagues ask you why your foundational blocks down there are not the items that you cover in government?
Content, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, all right. So that's, you know, that's a real, so here's the problem. Here's the fundamental lie we tell ourselves. If we give students content, if we give students content without context, if we give them content without the ability to process that content, it's largely lost. So there is content. They are supposed to do a lot of that content in parallel, but I don't spend a lot. I spend most of my live time, and I'll talk about that in a moment, working with them about how to use the content. So, and I use the assessments to drive that. But at the end of the day, what I need my students to be able to do, in order to be able to, I teach government, for those of you that don't know. So in order for my students to, you know, to achieve the goals that I set for the class, they need to be able to figure out how to access information about government, how to find information, how to critically evaluate that information. They need to figure out how to construct an argument, which you would think they would learn in an English class, which they're supposed to be taking at the same time as my class. But for the most part, they've never seen a real argument deconstruction. They're completely mystified when I start doing that with them. And I can show you what that looks like. They need to be able to synthesize information. That's what the blogs do. And they need to be able to communicate, which is what the blogs do, as well as what the final portfolio does. So the foundations are what they're doing, what they're building, and their ability to operate within the context of the content. But the content is not a foundation. It is at a certain level, but it really isn't, because again, if they don't have the tools, ideally we have a bigger system that supports this in a better way. But as a teacher, I don't feel like I can teach government effectively unless they understand how to do these things.
Yeah, me too.
And the problem with just feeding them content is that it's not meaningful to them. This is where we get back to, okay, so now I'm back to having to see whether they actually memorize the content, if I'm lucky, analyze the content, which they don't really have the skills to do very effectively. And I'm back to an assessment method that's all about seeing how much of the content they remember. And that's not really what I'm after. I want them to be thinkers. You know, I want them to learn how to learn. I want them to learn how to think about information. I think that's more important than memorizing information, especially in today's day and age. And that's a real, you know, that's a real challenge. And you have to balance that out in your class. I've always taken a very sober assessment of how much of the content in my class my students actually remember. And of course, I have very little basis, although I have some actually. I used to have more, but I have some basis for seeing what they remember from one semester to the next. Because I have had students who've taken both semesters of government from me, and when I'm doing a certain section, which is kind of repeated, the same ideas from the last class, I kind of go, okay, Joey, you already covered this. Tell us about it. He's like, well, I don't know. I mean, I've almost never had anybody go, oh yeah, interest groups. Let me explain that to you. Right. So that in and of itself should give you some pause as to how much they retain. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think the problem with our students is not the problems go much deeper than their ability to absorb content. And so how do we have to work toward that. And it's, ideally, this is the kind of stuff that's done in foundational classes like the student success course, but we don't teach that in student success, or at least it doesn't take, because when they come to my class, they still can't do it. Right. So I'm kind of forced by circumstances and to work in this way. I think at the end of the semester, they probably remember about as much of the content as they did before, but hopefully their skills are much better that they can then apply not only to other government classes into their lives, but also to other classes, period, as well as their jobs. And so those are my focus, my foci in terms of what I'm trying to assess from them. Now, government's baked into this. The blogs are about government at a certain level. The sources are about government at a certain level. The arguments, the things that they're trying to do. There's a semester-long challenge that all of my students do. They get to pick the topic that's most relevant to them, but then we spend the semester trying to relate that topic back to government. Say, okay, how does government affect? I've got students doing, free college and student debt elimination. I've got students doing healthcare. These are things that that matter to them at a certain level, hopefully. And I spend a fair amount of time trying to figure out what that is at the beginning of the semester, because that hopefully gives them a touch point to make things more meaningful to them. Now, the part where I do stress content a bit is by using the gateway assessments. Every section of the course has readings that they have to do, most of which are from the textbook. I also do some videos. I bring in some other readings and stuff. And the idea is that they're doing this foundational work and they're getting some understanding of that. This assessment is basically a conditional assessment in Canvas. Basically, the grade doesn't count. It's required to unlock something that does count. So, and you can take this over and over again. I don't really care if they cheat, to be honest, because if they cheat, they're still learning the material at a certain level. The idea is to get them to at least have a cursory knowledge of the content going into the harder work, the higher level work. And so that's what these quizzes are in the process. These are the gateway assessments. Again, they don't generate any points. All they do, you can't submit the blog assignment until you've done the gateway assessment. It's that simple. You can't really do this except online. It's not like I can throw somebody out of a class when they didn't pass the quiz. That's difficult or problematic. But you can do it in person. I'm sorry, you can do it in Canvas. And this is one way in which you can blend technology into your assessment strategy to be able to do something that wasn't possible without the technology. I'm always looking for opportunities, technology-driven opportunities to do things that I couldn't do before. Now, the heart of what I'm doing here, though, is something I call formative assessment. Formative assessment, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this, but there are a number of key factors here that determine whether something is formative or not. One of the key ones is that you're only competing against yourself. You're trying to achieve a certain level of thinking, of being able to do things. And you're not really competing against the rest of the class in that sense. There's no way to curve a formative assignment. The assignments are linked into the workflow of what's going on in the class. And feedback is incredibly important to this process. And understanding, talking to the students about the work that they've done collectively or individually. So here's an example of how I use formative assessments in the setting up my blogs, for instance. I break down my blogs into 10 different things that I want my students to be able to do. They represent different levels of what we would call Bloom's taxonomy. I use a system that a friend of mine at Full Sail developed, Emily Ray. She has a thing called RISE model, which is kind of simplified Bloom's taxonomy. But the very basic level is reflection, which isn't really reflected in this assignment. Inquiry. Reflection is basically being able to read and respond to something. That's reflection. Inquiry is to be able to bring something new to the table and to bring in outside, understand the connections between something that's outside the flow and bring that into the conversation. Suggestion, which again is not really reflected in this assignment, is responding to other people's ideas and bringing in something new to the assignment, but doing it in a very substantive way, as opposed to simply riffing off of what they said, rewriting an idea that they have, making it better. And elevate, which is creating something new out of pieces that you've collected. That is not laid out for you in a textbook. You can't really cheat in an elevate assignment in a sense. So there's certain parts of this blog that are elevate, and there's certain parts of this blog that are inquiry. Most of it's elevate, because this is kind of what everything builds toward in the middle of the class. Okay, so the way that this is a formative assessment is that if you do any of these 10 things, you get those 10 points. It's an all or nothing system. And the qualitative aspects of it do come out, but it makes for a very easy way of explaining all the different pieces that have to go into a successful 500 to 1,000 word blog, which for all intents and purposes is a paper, and breaking that down to for the students in a way that they can see what's going on. I actually have an example blog on the on my course website that shows each of these pieces in action, right? So. This does a number of things. One, this is how I present the grades in terms of each of the blogs. Each student is given a code number, an anonymizing number, so they can see where they fall, but they don't necessarily know who everybody else is, but they can see where they are relative to the rest of the class. And I will usually comment on things, especially the lower grades. This gives me a number of really interesting things to talk about with the class. For one thing, it lets me know, for instance, nobody got the concept map points. So that tells me I need to spend extra time on that particular aspect of the blog. and also the graphic points. This is not an unusual spread for the first blog coming out the gate. And it lets me, kind of gives me a little bit of a learning analytics tool. But then when the students come back to me and say, okay, I don't understand why I got this grade, I can say, well, you didn't get this part and you didn't get this part. And we can walk through their assignment and say, this is what a tie-in looks like. This is what you didn't do here or what you did do here, and so on and so forth. And so this is actually kind of a nice little tool. It also, by the way, makes grading easier in terms of, one of my frustrations with grading the old-fashioned way was always that, I'd write all these comments and I know the students didn't read them. This allows me to essentially comment on what they are and what they aren't doing in such a way that is very easy for me to communicate and they can see very easily. And then I have a few elaborating comments in the notes, which I can give them. But this isn't the end of the process by any means. And that's the other important part of the formative assessment, because after this is due, we spend a lot of time as a group and also individually, if possible, talking about, strengths and weaknesses of what they're doing and making them, trying to get them to reflect. One of the other problems, that in terms of the way a lot of the assignments go and the way the students are taught to interact with assessments is they're very much fire and forget. In other words, you build up to the test and then the test is over and okay, we're on a new section. We're starting over. What we just did is not, it's not relevant anymore. I don't care. And I'll cram for it in the final, but you start getting these discontinuities in the class. Well, everything in my class is designed to hang together. And so I talk all the time about, okay, this is what you did in blog number 1. This is this part of what we're trying to do over the course of the semester. This is what you did in blog number 2, and so on and so forth. And this is what you do in blog number 3. The idea is improvement, feedback, and all of those sorts of things. So there's a lot of different instances of formative assessment throughout the class. And again, we spend a lot of time looking at these things after the fact. So they fall into 4 basic areas. First of all, they have to collect sources ahead of time for the blog. So then we look at those sources, we plug them into their arguments. We do some arguments as well. We set up the arguments first and we say, okay, this is what, if you're going to say this, this is what you have to prove in order to pull that off, right? And we look at sources. I mean, this is part of literacy, digital literacy, source information literacy. We go through these one at a time, right? The blogs themselves, the web drafts, which are once again taking the information from the blogs but translating that into a format that works on the web. So over the course of the semester, they're constructing a website. That's my summative assignment at the end of the semester. Is a website that they themselves build. So I'll come back to that when we talk about summative assignments. And then comments, which is feedback on other people's work. Okay. And we talk about all of these things as they're happening. We don't, we go back and look at things and so on and so forth. So this is a nice way of looking at the way formative assessment is supposed to work. One of the reasons that I look at this and I think about this is useful, and I put a link to this on the Google Doc at the bottom, along with some other sources on this, is, if you really break down what you're doing in a class and think hard about, okay, where do I want to spend my time with my students as well as the class as a whole? What can I push to the side? Can I, automate? Can I make more efficient so that I have more time for the things that are the most, first of all, for one thing, they're the most rewarding, at least for me when it comes to teaching, that personal interaction with the students, having those conversations. And it turns out that those are some of the most important things you can be doing in a class. So how can I build my assessment strategy? How can I build the way the class works to maximize that interpersonal time? My content, my lectures, the talks I give, I record those. I don't do that live. what I do live is I have conversations with my students. I'll have an activity. I'll say, okay, let's look at your stuff. Let's build an argument for the next blog. Let's think about how that works. Let's look at your sources. Let's deconstruct your argument. All of those sorts of things, make them engage with the content and in a way that you wouldn't in a different kind of assessment. The things on the left on this assignment are on things is from my own experience. These are things where our students have severe struggles. They look to you to do all of these things for them. At some point, they're going to have to do these things themselves in a work environment. The boss isn't going to be there to handhold them through all of this stuff. And we're hoping to build people who are lifelong learners and thinkers. The blue stuff is what you need to integrate into your design process of your course itself. But the purple stuff is where I want to spend my time. That's where I want to spend my interactive time with my students, is negotiating what those goals are so that they mean something to the students. So they're not just my goals, but they're their goals. I mean, I have to sell them on certain things a little bit because I have a deeper understanding of what they need to be able to do and why certain things matter. But I'm constantly going back and saying, this is how this relates to the whole of the class. This is how this relates to what I'm trying to get you guys to practice, the skills that I'm trying to get you guys to practice. Again, there's this link, this chart is on this link, although I've annotated it a little bit, but think, I challenge you to think about that. So there are, parts here that are built into the purple stuff is the stuff where I'm spending a lot of time reflecting on what they're doing, trying to get them to stop and look back at what they're doing in the context of, okay, here's how I do this better. Here's how, where I'm, trying to understand these things better. And that's all part of that, growth process. I consider that to be teaching. And they all loop back. So there's again, there's an iterative thing as far as the class is concerned, that the students are getting better at things. The blog assignments, the actual format of the blog doesn't change. The questions that they have to address do change so that they're doing different things. The first blog is really about refining their challenge and understanding how to explain things. The second blog is analysis, which is a direct, I'm forcing them to say, okay, does this part of government help me with my challenge, get in the way, et cetera, et cetera. The third blog is to analyze solutions, because I don't want them to simply say, okay, we can just snap our fingers and the world will be a better place and we'll get rid of student debt. I want them to look at what people have actually tried to do and did they work or not, things like that. And then the final portfolio puts all those things together and adds a few more parts of government that they have to analyze. So, but these are all, again, okay, we've done this before. Let's think about what we did before and how do we learn from that. So the last piece of the puzzle is the summative assessment. Now, most of us do summative assessments all the time. I mean, every test effectively can be a summative assessment. And you can break that down in terms of, again, we tend to look at, and I know we do this a lot of times we kind of break down in terms of the grading scale, in terms of expectations and stuff. And this is where we have this constant battle of, am I making this too easy? Am I too soft on these grades? Or am I too hard on these grades? And you go from institution to institution, and the nature of this sort of thing changes considerably. I remember I did my undergraduate at UT Austin, hence the graphic. I did my undergraduate at UT Austin, and everything there was pretty much graded on a bell curve in the 80s at least. And I remember when I went up to Georgetown and was a teaching assistant as a graduate student, my very first assignment from my professor was to grade a paper. and I graded it, and she looked at it and went, "You can't give them these grades; they'll kill you." Because I had graded based on, okay, this is a bell curve. You know, here's the middle. These guys are that much better. These guys are that much worse. No, at Georgetown, the middle of that bell curve is not a C; it's a B minus or a B. And so I had to go back and redo everything. But that kind of gives you a good illustration of just how wonky these notions of grades are. There's not some holy writ here that says, if you do this, you get this grade. The nature of the questions that you ask, even on a multiple choice test, how you structure that test has a big effect on what that grade distribution is going to be. When I used to do multiple choice tests, my students always did much worse on them than they did on essay tests. And that's because I didn't simply say, how many people are there in Congress? I said, I was interested in things like, in this scenario, what can this senator do in order to get something through Congress? I was trying to get them using multiple choice format to get them to think critically about things. My good friend Mark Tiller is infamous for his multiple choice tests, and we used to spend a lot of time gaming out questions together. So in this case, the summative assignment has to be meaningful. It can't be an arbitrary hand of God kind of assignment. So one thing I do is my summative assignment is the capstone for the class. At the end of the semester, this is how I assess what they've learned over the course of the semester. Everybody has to do it. It's worth a significant chunk of points, but it's a minority of the points in the class. So if they've kept up with the work, they've generated a pretty solid foundation for the summative assignment. Also, in theory, if they've done all the work, they've been practicing these skills, and the summative assignment they'll do better on that because of that. It's tough to pull this off, to be honest. It's always a little bit of a sobering moment, just how far I can get the students to get at the end of the semester as we go through it. And this is the one part of the class where I'm always tweaking. So I'm sorry. Okay, Lena. I'm recording this, so I'll put it up. So since it's the last assessment, also feedback is a little less critical because they're not building. This is really the end of the class. So where are you going to go from here? So everything else we do is feeding toward that summative assignment. I actually have this template that shows all the different pieces that go together. They're building a website in my class as a project. And it's, by the way, their website. It exists outside of Canvas. They submit a link to it, and it's something that they can keep. It's a tangible product that they can keep long after the semester is over. And we look at this periodically, and the different blogs build different boxes here. And then the dotted line stuff is the stuff that they have to add in at the end. So, yeah, Lena didn't miss much. So in terms of, let me go over to the, see if anybody's been tooling around on the Google Doc at all. Oh man, you guys haven't put anything on here. You're all failing the class. So there's for those of you that came in a little late, I put together a Google Doc to get you guys to sort of think about. See if I still have it in paste. Yeah, there it is. So to get you guys to think about a little bit in terms of as we go through. Carmen, Linda, do you have questions? June's not shy about asking questions, but I want to make sure I get the other guys too. Thoughts? He's totally off his rocker. I realize that there are different levels at which an individual faculty member in different departments in different scenarios can push this. Okay. Um, and you know, but you know, you have to think hard about what you're actually able to do with that. So, by the way, this is one of the things I do. Is this this is called a Toolman argument thing. So I'm getting them to take apart what they're doing for different parts of the class as they're going through their arguments. This may look messy, but this is a working document that I do with them live in class. And you can see how the argument generates the need for sources. And then this gives them some idea what they need to be looking for. So good. I'm glad you have a meeting with a student shortly. I hope it's a good meeting. Okay. Well, as I said, I probably talked too much on this one. June or Linda, anything? Yeah, I did record this, so I will upload this after I did it in Zoom, so I have to sort of upload it to EduTube and then get it over to the virtual lounge. But yeah, I'll get it up there. So I went for the lowest common denominator of the. I just recently finished a blog for eCampus. It's not actually out yet, but I call it the 4 stages of Zoom enlightenment. And I go through different levels of online conferences and how effective they are. And I definitely leaned into the lowest stage here, which is presentation, listening to myself talk. But you have to design for the higher levels too. But that takes more time is the problem. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of limited to an hour. Okay, well, good, Linda. I appreciate the positive feedback. Feel free to poke around in that Google Doc. The link is there. The link's also in the presentation. So if you're watching it, you can see it there. I'm probably, I'll leave it live. You can edit it. But it's also a good tool, by the way, to do assessment, to communicate with your students, to create living documents, for instance, use Google Docs. I do it some. I have different kinds of things that I do, but it's always a work in progress. I'm very much into visual stuff, so I try to do concept maps a lot. This summer, I'm going to start playing around more with Miro. Well, it's highlights. I mean, I would say, they're different things. Some of these things are not like the others. Transactional is the product is what you want to try to get away from. And it's not easy. It really isn't. Our students are programmed to do transactional teaching or transactional learning.
As are teachers.
Yes, we are too, right. And there's certain things about the system that need to change that are products of systems that were started up in the 1960s and that are based on technology from that era. That we've long since transcended the technology, but we haven't really changed the systems that we still depend on. Grades are one good example of that. A grade is a lousy reflector of what a student is. It really is. A GPA, a transcript, they really don't tell you what a student's about. There are always a lot of ways we try to cheat that, but one of the things, the reasons I do a tangible product at the end of my semester is that if I want to show, well, yeah, I mean, I think I don't, so a tangible product is a means to an end. It's a means to a meaningful summative assessment. It's a component of the thing. Summative is what we're used to doing. I mean, summative basically means you're judging somebody's capabilities. That's what that boils down to. You get an A, you get a B, you get a C. We all effectively have to give students a summative grade at the end of the semester. The question is, what does that grade actually mean? In my class, a lot of what that grade means is, did you put forth effort? Did you put forth effort to try to do higher level thinking and higher level assignments? Were you consistent in your engagement with the class over the course of the semester? Not, you know, can you ace a test? And this is coming from somebody who got through a lot of my high school experience. So I got into UT based on my SAT score. Back in the day, that's how you got in. If you got above a certain SAT score, you were in. Does that mean I was going to be a good student at UT? Well, I was, but it didn't really have anything to do with the SAT. I was always good at standardized tests. But I'm also the first to tell you that they're a game, and they're something that, you know, they have meaning and use, but how you use them matters a lot. Okay. And our tests are like the SAT in many cases, in the sense that they're a game. They have utility, but how you use them matters a lot. And you got to think really hard about what exactly you're communicating and how effective they are as a communication tool with your students. Formative assessments are fundamentally, from the get-go, designed to be communication tools. That's what I'm thinking about at all times. Not how good you are, how bad you are. It's me getting a sense of where you are in the process. And then me helping you get further down the process. Understanding where your weak points are. Not everybody has the same weak points. Understanding where your strengths are and building on that. That's what an assessment should actually do. If your assessment's not doing that, it's not really doing a very good job for you or for the student. So, you know, ask yourself as you're designing assessments, am I achieving those goals? And that's fundamentally a formative assessment is that loop of understanding, of really focusing on, let's figure out what's going on here. Because if you've got a mystery, why is this student failing these tests? Or why is can't this student write an essay? That's a mystery you need to solve. And if you never solve that, you're never going to figure out how to teach to that student. Right? So transactional is, I would say, the bad side of the coin, because it gets you away from that creative thinking. It can't get you to put the candle on the wall, right? Formative is designed to nurture creativity and self growth, because at the end of the day, your students are the ones who have to decide to grow. Summative is a way of showing off what you can do. And a tangible product is a way of showing off what you can do meaningful. It's yours, right? In an art class, you have an advantage, June, and at least as far as the studio classes, in that the students create products, right? I still have art projects from when I was in the 4th grade. And that's a tangible, you know, 50 years later or 45 years later or whatever, I don't remember how old I was in the 4th grade, but you know, it's still something like, hey, I made this and I gave it to my grandfather, and then I inherited it back when he died. But that has a special meaning to me, right? And so can you make assignments? Can you make assessments that have that level of meaning to your students? Because that's where they'll drive. That's where their drive will come from.
And those don't have to be physical anymore.
They don't, no. I build a website,
yeah,
but it's their website, right? And I say, look, if I'm an employer, I don't care what field you're in, if you can explain things to people using technology, that's an incredible asset. So if I'm looking at 2 IT techs, right? And they're both good troubleshooters, can fix computers and whatever. And I used to hire IT techs, for those of you who don't know that. the one who has built a website that it can demonstrate to me that they know how to communicate, I go, oh, okay, wait a minute. I can save a hell of a lot of time by getting this guy to build websites to explain to users how to fix common problems. So now they don't have to call the IT techs, which takes the pressure off of them, or some pressure, and so on and so forth. I don't care what field you're in. If you can do that, you can suddenly become a bigger asset to your students, to your employer, than someone who can't do that, right? And so I explain that to my students. I say, I don't care if it's about government or about something you care about with government. You're showing what you can do in terms of communication, how you can use information and present information in an effective way online. And, you know, hopefully that matters to them. It matters more than I got a B in government or a C in government. I'll tell you that. So, anyway, we kind of gone over time here a little bit, but I will, as I said, I will post the recording. You know, a little bit of self-promotion. This is what I'm doing with some of these sessions. Is I published a book back in December called "Learn at Your Own Risk," and this is chapter 3. And I'm doing a little workshop on each one of the chapters. And my goal is to do all 9 of the strategies that I did. So, but the book is out there. It's on Amazon if you're interested. But anyway, I know June already bought it. Bye, June. All right, I'll let you go too. The link to that is also on the Google Doc.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. This has been great.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.
Appreciate it. Appreciate the feedback.